Welcome to the deep dive. This is where we really get into the details of source material, try and figure out what's really being said.
Mm-hmm. Not just scratching the surface.
Exactly. And for this deep dive, we've got just one source we're focusing on. It's an article from, wow, April 1923.
A century ago, yeah?
Right. It's called The Subordinate Lodge Should Take the Initiative. The author was Joe P. Bowdoin. He was the Grand Master of Georgia then, and it was in the Builder magazine.
And it's a really interesting piece because it's like a window into how an organization at a specific point in time was thinking about educating its own members. A real internal challenge.
Okay, so our mission here is to unpack what Bowdoin was arguing back then. What did he see as the big problem for Masonic lodges in Georgia, and what was his proposed fix?
Yeah, precisely. It gives us that snapshot of their concerns and their strategies.
All right, let's jump right in then. He starts pretty directly, doesn't he, about where the responsibility lies for, well, for teaching members.
He does. He says, let me see, something like, to my mind, the education can come only from the fraternity. And then clarifies, the fraternity is primarily the Masonic Subordinate Lodge.
The local chapter, basically.
Exactly. He puts it right there. On the local level, that's where members learn their duties to God, country, others, themselves. And he says the strength of the whole statewide group, the grand jurisdiction, depends on these local lodges.
Okay, so the local lodge is the key place for education. But then he pretty quickly says something's, well, wrong. He talks about needing to get away from just grinding out of candidates and conferring of degrees.
Yeah, that phrase grinding out is pretty blunt.
It really is. Sounds like a critique of just, processing people.
It is. He really focuses on this problem. Lodges were getting bogged down in the mechanics, the ritual itself. The focus was too much on the perfect performance, what he calls the rendition of the work.
Oh, okay.
And the main goal, it seems, had sort of shifted to just making members, getting them initiated, rather than actually making Masons.
That distinction feels really important. Making members versus making Masons. So they were doing the ceremonies, maybe doing them well, but missing the substance.
That's exactly his point. He argues the ritual, the symbols, which are core to Masonry, were being treated, well, superficially, like it was just a dramatic performance.
Just a show.
Or something you recite letter perfect, like a pole parrot, he says, which is quite an image.
Yeah, a pole parrot, just repeating words without understanding.
Right. The focus was on memorizing, reciting, but not really grappling with what it all meant.
So, okay, if being a pole parrot is the problem, what does Bowdoin think the ritual should be for? How should it be used?
He's very clear about shifting that focus. He says lodges will find the real value, the pregnant possibilities of learning, when they grasp that a ritual is only for interpretation, that symbols are merely for explanation.
Interpretation and explanation.
And that true Masonry lies solely in the proper application of the emblems.
Application. Okay, so interpretation, explanation, and application. It's not just knowing the stuff, it's understanding it and then critically actually living it, doing something with it.
Precisely. The rituals aren't the end point. They're the tools, the vehicles, meant to teach these core principles so members actually, apply them in their daily life.
Right, makes sense. So Bowdoin sees this problem performance over understanding, ritual over application. What were they actually doing about it in Georgia back in 1923? Were there concrete steps?
Yes, the article talks about specific actions. At their big annual meeting, the communication, in October 1922, they passed a resolution. It came from the General Welfare Committee.
Okay.
And this resolution set up a dedicated committee on Masonic education.
A whole committee just for this education issue. Who was in charge?
It was led by a past Grand Master, N.H. Ballard. The article points out he was known as a Masonic student, but also, and this seems significant, he was the superintendent of the Georgia State Department of Education.
Oh, interesting. So bringing in actual education expertise from outside the usual fraternity structure.
Seems like it, yeah.
Yeah.
Suggests they were serious about finding effective educational methods.
So what was this committee supposed to do? What was their task?
A few key things. First, they were told to arrange a series of study courses for the various lodges.
Actual courses, like a curriculum.
This kind of, yeah.
Yeah.
Structured learning materials. And the goal was stated very clearly, to present a plan that will endeavor to make Masons as contrawise to the recent desire to make members. They wanted tools to help lodges make that shift he was talking about.
Moving from just processing people to actual substantial education. You mentioned conventions too, district and county ones. What was the plan there?
Right. So historically, those conventions had been mostly about showing off the ritual, the rendition of the work, as he calls it, demonstration.
Performance again?
Exactly. So the new Committee on Masonic Education was also tasked with creating specific educational programs for these conventions. The idea was that members attending could actually learn of the hidden truths and principles, become more than a mere poll parrot.
So transforming those meetings from ritual showcases into real learning opportunities.
Okay.
And he mentioned this wasn't just a Georgia thing, he connected it to something bigger.
He did, yeah. He explicitly says their committee would endeavor to provide for Georgia Masons what the Masonic Service Association of the United States is doing through its program.
The Masonic Service Association, so a national effort was underway too.
Seems so. It suggests this feeling, this need for better, more meaningful education, wasn't isolated to Georgia. It was part of a broader trend in American Masonry at the time.
Interesting. So there was this sense that maybe something was lacking educationally across the board. The article also digs into the why, doesn't it? The purpose behind this educational push. It wasn't just for internal improvement.
Right. This is where you see the sort of bigger vision. Right. He quotes from a report, I think from 1920, talking about an awakening in American Masonry. It mentions the chaos, readjustment, and confusion of the times.
Post-World War I era.
Exactly. And out of that, this ideal of a bigger, broader, and better education was emerging.
And he frames it as not entirely new.
Correct. He says, we cannot say it is the birth of a new ideal. It is more of a resurrection of the old principles of our forefathers, linking it back.
A resurrection.
As written in the Declaration of Principles of our nation. So he's explicitly tying this renewed focus on Masonic education to foundational American civic ideas, rediscovering them, applying them.
That's quite a connection, a resurrection of old principles tied to national ideals. So what was the explicit purpose stated in the article for this American Masonic education?
It lays out a very clear threefold purpose. Number one, the conservation of the Republic.
Okay.
Number two, the cooperation of pure citizenship. And number three, the Americanization of the people.
Wow. Conservation of the Republic, pure citizenship, Americanization. That's a very civically focused mission for a fraternal group's education program.
It is. And the article is careful to say how this should happen. Not by the organization acting politically as a fraternity, but by individualistic preparedness. Meaning the power comes from educating the individual member, the education of the craftsman, to the highest plane of citizenship through his Masonic ideals. The lodge teaches the person, and the person acts as a good citizen out in the world.
So it's about equipping the individual to be a better citizen based on these principles, rather than the group itself taking political stances.
Exactly. And this vision stands in really stark contrast to that earlier critique about just focusing on ritual performance.
Right, the poll parrot idea.
Absolutely. He explicitly contrasts this purposeful civic education with what he dismisses as the worn-out bromidic platitude of a more beautifully rendered, letter-perfect ritual. He sees the focus on rote learning as totally superficial compared to this deeper aim of building character and fostering responsible citizenship. It's a call to shift focus entirely.
Okay, so we've seen the core challenge Bowdoin laid out in 1923. Lodges focusing too much on just performing rituals, on making members, instead of truly educating them and making Masons who understood and applied the principles.
And the proposed solution was this shift towards structured education committees, study courses, revamped conventions, all aimed at deeper understanding and application, even linking it to civic duty.
You know, looking back at this from a century later, this whole pushback against just going through the motions, advocating for real education focused on application, it raises questions that feel surprisingly relevant today, doesn't it, for almost any kind of group?
It really does. It makes you think about how any organization could be a professional body, a nonprofit, even a company talking about its core values. How do they balance teaching the basics, the rituals or procedures, with making sure people actually get the deeper why and live it out?
Yeah, how do you avoid creating poll parrots of the company mission statement or the club charter? How do you make sure people aren't just reciting things, but actually internalizing and applying them?
And how do groups keep their educational methods fresh? How do they adapt over time to ensure members or employees are genuinely engaged with the core purpose, not just trained on the surface level stuff?
It's a constant tension, I suppose. This article really leaves you thinking, if, like Bowdoin argued back then, the real value, true Masonry, in his words, lies solely in the proper application of the emblems, well, how does any group today make sure its people move beyond just learning the symbols, the rules, the mission statement, to actually living those core values out in the world? That challenge definitely hasn't gone away.
Not at all. It's a fundamental question about translating ideals into action.